Hey guys, so we are doing nature versus nurture, and we're going to get right into it. It's going to be a little bit longer than the last couple of videos, um, but still fairly short than compared to some of my other videos, so just keep that in mind. Let's just get right into it. Most scientists today are not very interested in the old controversy of whether nature or nurture is more influential in the development of a person. Matt Ridley, author of Nature via Nurture, says, quote, "For more than 50 years, sane voices have called for an end to the debate. Nature versus nurture has been declared everything from dead and finished to futile and wrong, a false dichotomy. Everybody with an ounce of common sense knows that the human beings are a product of transaction between the two. The discovery of how genes actually influence human behavior and how human behavior influences genes is about to recast the debate entirely. No longer is it nature versus nurture, but nature via nurture. Ridley, so this was written in 2003. The Human Genome Project has changed our understanding of genes and their role in our development. It is much more complicated than once thought. We know that children do not come into this world as blank slates, nor do they come in as genetically programmed automatons, so basically like robots, right? Dr. Stanley Greenspan, a psychiatrist at George Washington University, says, quote, "It is not a competition, it's a dance," unquote, from Nash in 1997. Ugh. Genes are important, and so is the environment of the womb for the developing fetus. We know that prolonged anxiety, drugs, alcohol, malnutrition, and viral infections can all affect the developmental process of the fetus. What happens right after birth is also important. And separating the mother and the infant, which has been the practice in most hospitals in the U.S. until recently, may be one reason that the United States is considered the country with the highest incidence of neurosis in the industrialized world. All right, pausing there. So I had my son back in 2013. That was not a question mark, I promise. He's going to be 11 quite shortly. And they were still separating the mother from the baby, right? I'm not going to tell the whole story, but, right after I had an emergency C-section, they took him away. And then there was one overnight during my 3-night stay where this was because he had to be in an incubator. So he had to be in a different room. But otherwise, he was with me because, and maybe this is my trauma response, especially between being an adoptee and a new, having been a new mom at the time, where I didn't want to be separated from him, right? It's that instinct of don't let him out of my sight. So, and FYI, if you hear background noise, it's because my kittens are playing. Okay, we're getting back into it. Between the ages of 1 and 3, a tremendous burst of activity is recorded in human brains. As the synapses are informed, trillions of connections are made. Then, about age 10, many of these connections begin to atrophy. This process continues until about age 18, when the brain declines in plasticity but increases in power. Nash notes talents and latent tendencies that have nurtured are in power. Nash notes, quote, talents and. Where was I? Oh my God. I'm sorry, guys. I just repeated that sentence. Okay. Let's start over. Nash notes, quote, talents and latent tendencies that have been nurtured are ready to blossom, unquote. This is very important for the adoptive families to know because, quote, the experience that drive neural activity, unquote, says Yale's Ryack, quote, are shears conjuring up form from a lump of stone or a length of cloth. The presence of extra material expands the range of possibilities, but cutting away the extraneous is what makes art, unquote, Nash, 1997. This conjures up a wonderful vision for me, one of shaping the future creativity of the child. Quote, it is the overproduction of synaptic, oh my God, today is not my day for reading, synaptic connections followed by their loss that leads to patterns on the brain, unquote, says neurologist William Greenough, I don't know if I pronounced that right, of the University of Illinois. Nash goes on to comment, quote, potential for greatness may be encoded in the genes, but whether the potential is realized as a gift for mathematics, say, or a brilliant criminal mind, depends on patterns etched by experience in those critical early years, unquote. Both nature and nurture play essential roles in the development of a human being. Okay. Sorry. I want to make a comment, but I'm going to wait till the end to talk about it. All right, let's continue on. We can see from these important discoveries that how an adoptive parent approaches his or her child can be crucial. Despite the terror of the beginning of their lives, repeated experience of understanding and love can help to form new pathways in the neurological system of children. Nothing can be forced, however. And as adoptees tell me over and over, love is not enough. What I have found to be the glue of the adoptive family bond is understanding and validation. That is true. No matter how much love a couple has to give, if there is no understanding of the loss their child has suffered or validation for their feelings about that loss, if there's no attunement between mother and child, there will be a tenuous bond. These children need parents who are emotionally balanced and available to their children. Also, not being jealous of the biological connection. Okay. Lewis et al. Said, quote, a child of emotionally balanced parents will be resilient to life's minor shocks. Those who miss out on the practice find that in adulthood, their emotional footing pitches beneath them like a deck of a boat in rough waters. The end of a relationship is then not merely poignant, but incapacitating. Oh my God. Incapacitating. Oh my God. Unquote. In fairness to adoptive parents, because of the distrust, separation, trauma causes for their children and behaviors, which ensure, even in the most stable of relationships, their job of establishing a balanced emotional environment is difficult. Nevertheless, it is essential to the well-being of a child for the parents to tune in to their emotions and try to understand their experience. To be constantly misunderstood creates anxiety, which adversely affects the forming of synapses. Siegel points out, quote, emotion is a fundamental part of attachment relationships in the early years and throughout the lifespan. The earliest forms of communication are about the primary emotional states, even as parents know they cannot take away their child's pain. They can empathize with it and validate the feelings the pain brings up. Siegel goes on to say the experience of being understood develops a mental model or inner expectation that needs are important and goals are achievable. Also, the child system requires that the parents' attunement to help organize the child's own mind. Siegel, 1999. Parents who are oblivious to what their child is going through will forever be wondering why the child does not seem to be closer to them. Another thing that we need to talk about. There has to be an acknowledgement, understanding, and empathy. And this means a real understanding of their pain, not just a superficial response to it. A child knows the difference between parents who are truly in tune with their feelings and parents who just want some relief from their own discomfort about the child's behavior. Their external response to their pain. Genes then determine what happens in the brain before birth, but after birth, the environment, including the presence or absence of the biological mother, plays a very important part in the billions of connections that are made. How adoptive parents handle the loss may have a great deal to do with how those synapses are formed. The experiences of the next 18 years will help determine what the child ultimately does with the innate talents and potential they were born with. This means that adoptive parents need to be exquisitely aware of what those talents and aptitudes are so that they can be encouraged rather than discouraged simply because they do not match the parents' own ideas of what is or is not important. Will the parents' attitudes act as chisels sculpting the latent talents of their child, or will they, by their neglect or disparaging remarks, place those talents on the chopping block, leaving their child feeling unappreciated, eventually losing track of their native talents or aptitudes? Okay, that is the end of this piece, but I do have my comments to make. So going back to, where was it? Let's say it was like sort of in the beginning when they were talking about, where is it? See, this is what happens when I ignore what I was going to say. Sorry guys, I'm looking for where I wanted to start with my, okay, anyway. It was talking about like could be criminal minds, right? So there was a study done. I'd have to go look. I definitely want to get into studies and do more of that in between readings. But there was a study done showing that 40% of criminals in the prison systems, right, along with mental hospitals and all that, end up being foster youth and adoptees. And I remember reading somewhere that there was a link that said if you have a parent that has a criminal record, that you're at a higher chance of repeating it, even if you're an adoptee. And I thought that was interesting because from my experience, I've fought against that portion of my, I guess it would be called my genomes, right? Because that runs in my family on my biological father's side. Unfortunately, I shouldn't laugh, but it's terrible. You know, just like we talk about how alcohol and drugs could play a huge role with the trauma, it also plays a huge role with having the addiction gene, and there's many layers to it. Anyway, knowing this from my family member, from my parents, my adoptive parents, while they're not demonizing my biological father, despite how horrible he is, in terms of looking at his record, as well as my half-brother, but not demonizing the criminality, right? The actions are horrible, but you can always change your life around. And I know that's debatable. I have my own thoughts on it. Anywho, I've always fought against that portion, right? You know, so anytime someone, how do I explain this? Anytime someone tries to make me like a villain, or like I make a mistake and my parents, like got upset, right? I just couldn't be the villain. I always needed to be like, not necessarily a hero necessarily. I know it's like weird to put those words into, but I'm trying to explain it in a way that I just didn't want to be compared in that manner to my biological family. If that's, yeah. And like the addiction gene runs in my family, right? And so I know it sounds strange, and I know more and more people are like going this route, but you know, like alcohol plays a huge role in our society, and people think that I'm crazy at times because I I don't drink. Like I never sought out a reason to drink, especially knowing that my family are alcoholics, right? Or drug addicts. Like that just I just didn't want to go down that road, knowing the effects. Um, but on the flip side, and while my adoptive parents tried their very best to encourage my creativity and my hobbies and all sorts of things, there are definitely times where specifically my adoptive dad just didn't and doesn't understand certain things. So while I may have this addiction gene, it doesn't necessarily show up with alcohol and drugs. Instead, it's, it could be books, or it could be food, or um, his his line is usually like, "You're so obsessed with fairies," because I love the Disney fairy um, line. I love Disney, He's like, "You're not going to get anywhere in life with that." But instead, encouraging, "Hey, honey, how can you make that part of you?" Right? Like, how can your love of this thing, why don't you write a story? Or why don't you, go into I was acting, but why don't you do more of it? You know what I'm saying? Like, there just needed to be a little bit more of the attunement on that. And I think sometimes parents, and maybe it's just parents in general, but especially adoptive parents, don't realize that their words can be harmful in that manner. Even though they think they're trying to do what's best, they don't realize that we ourselves are fighting this war within us sometimes. At least in my case. I can't speak to everyone, but I feel like many of us are. Um, you know, anyway, I just went on a huge rant. I hope you all have a fantastic day, and I'll see you guys later.